Welcome to another episode of Path to Peace. I'm joined by Joel. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, no problems, Lockie. Thanks for having me, man. Looking forward to a chat.
Yeah, should be good. Should be good. So give us a bit of a insight into you, what you do, your work. Give us a start.
I'm a psychologist based out of the Sutherland Shire. I have a general practice. My background is in sport and performance psychology. So I've got a master's degree in sports psych, and I do a little bit of, or a lot of sports psych work, but predominantly do more general psychology work. So I work particularly with blokes, men's mental health. I do a lot of couples work, do a lot of individual work as well. So yeah, general psychologist, but I have a sport and performance leaning or focus.
Perfect. Yeah, and so obviously you see a lot of athletes for their, performance pressures and anxiety. And I guess you specialize in that type of thing, or you kind of have a range of things that you see.
Yeah, definitely. I specialize in sport and performance psychology. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the work we do is with athletes, not just, professional athletes, but people of all ages. I work a lot with younger kids or people coming into rep sport for the first time. So that's a lot of the work we do. Sometimes working with parents to help them just manage their expectations of their kids and not put too much pressure on, younger athletes coming into professional or rep sport for the first time. So it's not just professional athletes. It's, athletes from all levels and ages and ranges.
Yeah, right. Do you, is there like a common theme you see across when you're dealing with not only just the parents, but the kids and trying to nurture that relationship? I guess a common theme with that performance pressure.
Yeah, exactly right, mate. It's performance pressure, which then becomes anxiety, and sometimes kids just manifest that themselves. Sometimes it's about what they're doing to themselves. Sometimes it's about, managing expectations, parents' expectations, coaches' expectations, just not feeling like they're in control. You go from being potentially a talented 12-year-old, 11-year-old, 13-year-old into, potentially rep sport for the first time, whether that's, rugby league or AFL or swimming or whatever it might be. And then there's heightened expectation because you're going to carnivals or you're going to swim meets or you're in talent ID squads, and it sort of changes then from being about yourself and having fun to expectations, Lockie. So that's a lot of what I deal with in terms of younger athletes and just managing their own anxieties around expectations, their own and other people's.
Yeah, right. Is it like, I guess like with that, I know you can't speak to actual like clients and stuff like that, but like, how has that been like any, like, I guess success? Like, has it been good to see someone that you start to see younger and then you see them, grow up, and then you see them, reach that potential that you're trying to help them get to, like success there?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about is supporting younger athletes. And that's why, for myself personally, that's a bit of a leading that I have and a focus I do try to engage in is working with athletes younger. So you do get that sort of sustainable approach, but also you do, as you've identified, get to see people go from, timid, shy, potentially anxious, younger athletes into more comfortable, confident, older athletes. And that doesn't necessarily mean they go off to play professional sport or go off to Olympics or those sort of things, but at least within themselves, they feel more comfortable and confident. And that's a big part of what I focus on, particularly with parents, is helping them understand that this is not about becoming Olympians or professional athletes. It's about making sure they have a comfortability around performing at their best. And there's a lot of lessons that kids and parents can learn out of, higher level sports. It doesn't necessarily equate to, $1 million contracts or Olympic gold medals, but certainly has a lot of benefits in other areas of life in terms of relationships in the future or workplaces in the future or studying in the future. It certainly does have a significant correlation if we use it the right way in terms of rep sport or high level sport, and then general life experiences as well, Lockie.
Yeah. So like, I guess, is there a, have you found like there's a lot of, like, actually, I'm interested to see actually, because I've been doing a lot of breathing myself, a lot of breathing techniques, a lot of meditation, and I found that really helpful before training, before games. Is that something where you focus on particular strategies, or is something where you could like flesh out, what's really the issue here? Like, I guess there'd be a mix of both.
Definitely need a balance of both. Definitely breathing, meditation, being more mindful about things. Lockie absolutely can help settle things in the moment. That's great. I'm a little bit more holistic in my approach. It's not just about strategies, but trying to help athletes understand where potential expectations are coming from, where anxiety might have started from, trying to give people a little bit more emotional insight. And often you find that once you can identify when, where, how, why, then those strategies work a lot better. If we're just looking at strategies first and foremost, it's almost an ongoing battle because we've got to do it all the time. But if we can understand the root cause or what triggers it or what sort of creates it, then we have a less need to, focus on strategies, and we just have a more general roundness or balance that gives us a little bit more insight as to how to sustain ourselves, particularly under competition pressure.
Yeah. I've, in conversations I've had just with mates, like they were super competitive in their sport, like very younger on, and then it kind of got ruined, I guess, by themselves, like by their own pressure they put themselves, and also parents' pressure as well, and other external pressures, their coaches' pressure. So when it comes to, I guess, developing a healthy relationship with the game, is it something where you kind of take them away from thinking about the fact that you're performing? Like are you more just kind of focusing on everything else but the performance part? Because I guess it's just like, I guess in physio, like if I had a bad shoulder or something like that, you're going to massage, what's around, and you're going to look at what the muscles are doing around it. Is it similar to that?
Absolutely. That's a great analogy. It is. It's about repairing the damage, but then also understanding where the muscles might be weak or where the stabilizers aren't quite right, and strengthening and they call it prehab, right? So doing work that can help prevent injury. So absolutely. Prehab in terms of physical preparations is a key phrase or a key idea at the moment. So in terms of the sport psychology aspect or focus that I take, it's exactly that, mate. It's about trying to understand where things have come from and where things might be a little unstable, and then working out how we can stabilize those. And unfortunately, you're right. I don't think parents or coaches intentionally or willfully want to create an issue for their athletes, but it definitely can happen. Like you said, some of the work I'm doing is, as I said, calming parents down or managing their expectations, because sometimes unconsciously they can put that pressure and expectation on their kids. And sometimes I find that it's parents that may not have achieved significantly in their own life, and they're trying to help their kids achieve more. Right. I often find that parents that have had quite a lot of success, or coaches that have a lot of success in their own life, are a little bit more relaxed around their athletes or their own kids, because they understand that it's a process, they understand that it's a step, and just because you make a rep team when you're 12 doesn't mean you can do it at 13 or 14, and just because you haven't made it by 15 doesn't mean your career's done. Some kids don't peak till much later in their life, and as we're starting to find out now through a lot of the women's professional sports, some people aren't even playing the sport, they end up becoming professional and they're playing other sports, and those skills transfer into, maybe basketball has become good AFL players, or, other combat athletes might become more rugby league players or rugby players, right? Because they're used to that contact and intensity. So, that's the other thing that I think people need to understand, that there's a transition and a skill set that can develop later in life. So I think professional athletes or higher achieving athletes, people understand that, but it's sometimes parents that, trying a little bit too hard to compensate or make up for potentially their own inadequacies or insecurities, that then they can unintentionally, I think most of the time, put that expectation or that weight on their kids when they're not emotionally ready for it.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. And it can be such a fine line between like enjoying the sport and just being genuinely just into it, but then also hating it because you feel like it's a chore, or feeling like you got the whole world watching you.
Absolutely. Especially when you're 12 or 13 or 14 and you're not emotionally, well, not you, but people aren't emotionally ready for that expectation and that increase. You go, as you say, you go from hanging out with your mates and playing sport on a Saturday or a Sunday and chilling with them after a game to, no, you've got to eat this way and strengthen this way and go to the gym and show up to training 3 or 4 times a week. And sometimes you've got to travel a long way to get there if the training places are not, the next door oval or the local community group, but you've got to go a bit further. So there can be that expectation as well. And then you're traveling potentially longer distances for competition. So it changes everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there like anything in particular that got you involved with this field? I know you love your sport, but into the world of psychology, I guess I'm interested, what kind of got you so passionate?
Yeah. It's an interesting journey, mate. My story, and it's not your traditional, finished HSC, got into uni, graduated, then become a psychologist. I personally, my story is a little bit more, yeah, well, I think it's a bit more typical, but maybe not more straightforward. I did my HSC and didn't do so well, and worked for a few years, and so I didn't know what I was going to do. And then, of all things, I had an accident on a motorbike at a friend's farm, and broke my ankle, and just rethinking about things when I was about 20, and I thought I might go back to uni, and wasn't quite sure or do my HSC again, and then with the hope to go to uni, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, and had a passion for sport, as you've mentioned, and always enjoyed being around teams and people, and consider myself to be a middle of the range athlete, nothing of any note, but certainly enjoyed that camaraderie, that teamwork, and I identify within myself that my passion was in supporting people and encouraging people, and a bit more a voice than a performer as such. And happened to just read an article about someone that was a psychologist doing some work with the Wallabies way back in must have been like 1995 or 1996. Was going back a while, and very in the early stages of sports psychology. I thought, well, that sounds perfect, and didn't know a lot about it, did a bit more research, and found out it was about, connecting with people and supporting people and being a little bit more emotionally present. I thought that would be perfect. So that's how I got into it, mate. It was a bit of a roundabout sort of way, but I guess it's a story that a lot of people can relate to. It's not necessarily a straightforward path from school to uni to happily ever after. Luckily, it can be a bit of a journey sometimes.
Yeah, it could often be, and even myself, it can often come from a period of like self-realization or a down period in your life where you actually really need to start thinking about your trajectory and like, okay, what am I actually doing? Like what do I want to do? Like, cause I want, obviously you want to do something that is fueling you, something that you genuinely enjoy. And it's so hard to know that coming out of high school. I think there needs to be a bit more outreach to that personally. Because myself coming out of high school, I had a year and a half like deferred because I had no idea what I wanted to do. But again, I had those pressures being like, oh, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to go to uni, you're going to go TAFE. Eventually I went to uni. But like I needed that year and a half to actually, okay, let me figure out what I want to do. Like, I guess, what did you do in the time after uni? Were you just like working odd jobs or just kind of doing your own thing before you went into uni after was age 20?
So I literally finished year 12 and then was up looking for jobs and didn't know what I was going to do. So I ended up doing an apprenticeship as a stonemason. Of all things, just literally was a job on a job card in the old CES back in the day, Centrelink now, and went and did an interview, and next thing I'm working as a stonemason, and anyone that knows me understands I can barely change a light globe. So becoming a stonemason, not the greatest idea, but hey, you do what you do, and did that for a few years. It worked out that wasn't for me, and got out of the apprenticeship, and then was doing a bit of labouring work, a little bit of factory work, and as I said, had that accident, and like you just identified, like it was a bit of a down moment that made me think a little bit more holistically or a little bit more long-term about where I was at and what I was doing. And I had people around me, thankfully, encouraging me that I was wasting my skills a little bit, and never considered myself to be a supersonic student by any stretch, but knew I had a little bit more talent that I was probably showing. And like you identified, it was my own determination, my own self-belief that took me back to TAFE. I did my HSC again through TAFE and then uni that way. So I think you're absolutely right, mate. Sometimes you just need that space and reflection point. And when you identify it for yourself, a bit like athletes, when it's about you and what you're trying to achieve and you understand your own thresholds in terms of talent and expectations, it's a lot easier just to commit to things and stick at it. But as you say, and as you've identified, if it's parents or friends or teachers or coaches or whatever it might be, pressurizing our performance or, trying to manage their expectations of our expectations, it becomes a little bit more tricky, mate. So as you've identified, like exactly right, that can happen early, like we did for us, similar sort of age, I think, and sometimes it happens a lot later in life, but it's important that you have that, as you say, that self-realization, that self-actualization, that there's a little bit more in the tank, and when you identify that, it's a little bit easier to stick to a process.
Yeah. Interesting. With the past, 2 years, it's been obviously going through COVID-19, I guess the bulk of it, fingers crossed.
Yeah,
And
let's hope so.
yeah, bloody hell. I don't want to jinx. I could touch him.
Yeah, no, touch wood. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I guess how was that impacting your business? I've heard people say it was amazing. Like it was actually good for them. And obviously we know the downside. It's been horrible for some people. How has that been affecting you personally and then your business?
Yeah, it's a good question, mate. Look, to be honest, it's been mixed for us in mental health psychology space. As you can appreciate, everyone's been significantly impacted mentally by lockdowns and restrictions and social distancing or physical, all those things. And so for us, there's been an influx, a spike in referrals, which has been good, but also for us quite overwhelming because you're dealing with people in significant distress, may have lost jobs or incomes or relationships falling through the floor. So it's been quite overwhelming for all of us in that psychology, counselling, mental health space. So we've had to make sure we've looked after ourselves and fortunately we've been able to keep working through. As an essential service, we were able to keep offering support either face-to-face, obviously when restrictions allowed, or telehealth, these sort of things. So we've been able to keep working, which has been good for business-wise, but in terms of distress and overwhelm for all of us, quite confronting. Lockie, it's a horrendous period of time for all of us.
I remember seeing stuff in the paper how much it spiked, how it the calls to Lifeline went insane.
Yep.
I guess, and this would be a hard thing for you, I imagine, to navigate when you want to keep it professional. You don't want to get, I guess, too emotionally tied to a client.
Yep.
How hard is that, I guess? Because I'm looking to get into the, I guess, counseling or therapist world myself, or at least life coaching. I'm interested, I guess, how hard is it to separate sometimes the professionalism from being in what from, because you are a psychologist.
That's a great question, Lockie, and for a lot of us it is a struggle, particularly if you're dealing with more vulnerable clients and you can see that they're genuinely struggling, and in spite of what we're talking about, it's a real struggle to apply some of those strategies. So you're absolutely right, it is very difficult to separate that professionalism from that emotional connection. It's a balance that every professional needs to get in terms of the mental health counselling space, and you need to have a pretty strong process that you follow. And for me personally, that's something I've been working on well before COVID hit, because to be in private practice, particularly, we're seeing clients back to back, and right at the moment, we've never been busier than we ever have in my entire 20 odd years of doing this. We've never been busier. So there's a lot of work out there, but I want to make sure that I'm giving every person that genuineness and that connection. And that's a fine line, because some people become too connected and then burn out. Some people aren't connected enough and become a little bit too distant. So you've got to be mindful that there's a balance there. So for me personally, my style doesn't resonate with everyone. Luckily, I don't make any bones about that in terms of when I'm working with clients. I'm a very compassionate, very caring, very supportive person, but I'm also a fairly straight shooter in terms of what I think is happening or what I sense might be going on. I'm certainly not aggressive in that, but I'm certainly very happy to have more direct conversations with clients, and some clients don't like that. Some psychologists don't do that. But for me, I find that keeps everyone nice and safe and puts some boundaries around what we're doing, because there's a balance there. You want to make sure you're compassionate and connected, but you also don't want to feel like, or personally, I don't want to feel like I've left anything off the table. Because that helps me sleep at night. No, all right, well, I've seen X amount of clients today. I've had all the direct conversations. I've tried to be fair, compassionate, reasonable, but I've also tried to be a little bit direct and guiding and a little bit more around those lines. Lucky that helps keep me comfortable. I've said what I need to say. They've heard what they've needed to hear, even if it's been difficult. We've worked our way through it, and we've given them some simple strategies in terms of being able to narrow it down and focus on what they've got to do in spite of feeling overwhelmed or distressed. So that's how I keep myself in check, mate, and that's a process that I stick to.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's you need to hear that. Like, I know myself, someone who I saw last year, 2 years ago, and who I'm still he's actually, I'm taking a course from him, of all things. But yeah, one thing that he said that was very, very straightforward, because we were looking at all my patterns that I was running. I guess my eating patterns, sleeping patterns, I guess general lifestyle patterns. And they looked very monotonous. They looked unhealthy, and they're also just very the same thing. Right.
Yeah.
And the one thing he said was he's like, which has always stuck with me. It hit me at first, but it's always stuck with me. It's like the definition of insanity is doing like the exact same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And like that's resonated with me. I always think about that whenever I'm doing an interview with someone or just in general. I just always think about it because if you're running in that same circle every single time, like you're obviously going to do those same. You're always going to feel the same way.
Yeah, and that's great advice, but sometimes that can be confronting, right? Sometimes you hear that and you get offended. I'm not going back to see that person. You're like, well, I'm just trying to help, I'm just trying to lay it out there. It works, right? So that's great.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess it's hard, and it's hard for you to know someone if they're going to take that advice the right way or if they're going to take it in another way. Yeah,
of course.
So that's another, I guess,
the tricky balance.
Or like, another.
Yeah. I always encourage people to have conversations like we're doing, right? You can disagree, and so some of my clients love that. Some of them love having a good stoush and a good conversation because it's done with compassion and kindness, and it's not done with malice or manipulative or controlling, right? It's done with a genuineness to want to get to the bottom of it relatively quickly. And as you've identified, Lockie, you hear something that offends potentially people, and if you use it the right way, it can be something that really works and something you can stick to down the track, mate. So that's exactly what I'm trying to achieve with all my clients.
Yeah. And I guess through the lockdown we were talking about before, I guess the main patterns that you've seen with clients, there's obviously been the financial worries, which has been, I guess, at an all-time high through people losing their jobs and having to get payments and all, and like having to isolate, all this stuff. But I guess, what has that been? What is the most, I guess, prevalent, I guess, conditions or I guess things that you've had to work with clients on?
Yeah, mostly for us human beings, we don't like restrictions, as we started to find out. We don't like having an inability to control things, and that's obviously what lockdown created. There was a time where you couldn't even leave your own suburb. There was a time where you couldn't physically go out your front door without having to justify your existence. So as human beings, we don't like that, and that's been the biggest thing. And for some people, it could be something simple as I couldn't go to my regular gym classes, and that's what threw me. For some people, it could be more significant in terms of work shutdown. I don't have any income, so those restrictions and the impact it had psychologically on people not being able to maintain their normal routines, that then caused a disconnect between themselves and potentially their partners or their kids, or obviously there was inability to go and visit people or see people. And it really did cause a lot of psychological and emotional distress, mate. We live in a country where you can pretty much within reason do whatever you like, and to have those restrictions in place and those liberties taken away, that's absolutely what it did to people emotionally. Just broke them down, and we can all appreciate how that happened.
Yeah. And I guess it's hard for people to, like, you can't, like, say if you had one client come in and they were telling you, like you said, like a really hard thing for them was having like the gym, like not being able to go to that class, right? And then the next client you see after that were telling you how their business is completely shut down. They've had to, and I guess hardships aren't exactly comparable because obviously we interpret things different ways. But I guess would you be saying like those same, not the same things, but
pretty similar things, right? Just, no, 100%, mate.
Okay.
You never want to be disrespectful. You never want someone says, "Oh, okay, my biggest distressor is I can't go to, my gym class," and you go, "Well, that doesn't count." And off you go, right? Versus someone going, "Oh, my business is falling," and you go, "Oh, well, that's the end of the world for you, and you should just quit," right? So it's there's a balance. Everyone's distress, as you say, is different. Everyone's tolerance levels are different. So for me personally, I'm very comfortable with, all right, well, if that's distressing for you, it's distressing, right? It's not about what I consider distressing, because what I can tolerate is different to other people, but it doesn't make it better or worse. It just makes it different. Lockie. So anyone worth their salt in terms of counselling, psychology, professionally, would be absolutely adopting the same mentality that everyone's distresses is absolutely fair and reasonable, and we want to treat it in a fair and reasonable way. And you never want to be dismissive just because it's not as significant as you might think it should be or could be. So that's definitely my approach, mate. Everyone's entitled to their own distresses, and we want to normalize it, we want to rationalize it, and then we want to help people understand how they can manage it, move it forward from big things like financial distress through to potentially not so bigger things in terms of exercise class or those sort of things in terms of a scale. So we want to be able to normalize it, but then we want to be able to give people safe options how to navigate that, whether it involves other people or just themselves.
Yeah.
About navigating it forward, mate.
Yeah. And I guess as you normalize each one and you validate each, I guess, problem that you see in their client, like that process to addressing it, like they can just be like, okay, sweet, it's similar to this problem. I can apply a similar method or a similar process. Like, and it often can come at the cost of just, oh, well, I'm reaching out to a friend, or I'm reaching out to this person. Like I'm looking through my network and seeing who can genuinely help with this. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, exactly right. And even within families, distress can be different, because someone like myself, kept going to work and could keep working versus other people in the household that couldn't go to work at all. So, do you know what I mean? Like that can cause its own distress, let alone, people that might be going through similar things, but quite different. And unfortunately, it had a lot of negative impact in terms of relationships, mate, and the amount of relationships that are broken down because potentially people are locked in and restricted and working from home and trying to fight over office space or whose work's more important. And then kids are at home and trying to homeschool and all those sort of things, mate. So even just within couples, it can cause distress. And unfortunately, as I said, a lot of relationships have broken down as a result of that distress.
It's something I kind of worry about as I'm becoming a teacher, but I've noticed with kids, but they were year 5, start of lockdown, now they're year 7.
Yep.
Or like year 3, now they're year 5. They're basically at that same level because lockdown, they didn't get to learn. They didn't get to, they lost a lot of those things. And it also made them more comfortable by being like isolated, which is like, you can like there's introverts, extroverts, but like it made certain kids more comfortable just being, or less comfortable being in a social situation. Is it something, are you seeing a bit more, maybe like younger kids as we come out of lockdown, like younger clients?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when things started to lift quite significantly early this year or back end of last year. Yeah, there was a lot of that, what we call like returning to normality anxiety. Yeah. As you've identified, if kids had gone from year 5 to year 7, they've missed that whole transition. And you go to high school and you're in year 8, right? And that could be the first time you physically have been in high school. So it's a big transition. And so you're right, mate, that caused a lot of anxiety. And, I was sort of thinking that a lot of kids would just readjust and go back to normal pretty quickly. But unfortunately, it hasn't been the case for everyone. Certainly a lot of kids have, but you're right, a lot of kids haven't. And so that can be quite distressing for not just the child, but for parents as well, because they've gone back to normal and they don't have necessarily the time to commit to their kids and those sort of things, because life's gone back to relatively normal. So it definitely is a transition issue, mate, and something we need to be very aware of.
Yeah, it's going to be, I guess, recurring over the next couple of years. Hopefully not, but we'll see. Yeah, I guess how it goes.
Yeah. But there's also a lot of upside to that, because I think it helps simplify things. Kids' sport wasn't on, so kids were out hanging out with their mates and riding bikes and neighbours and doing those things when you're allowed to. So I think there's a lot of upside and simplicity to lockdown as well, which people enjoyed and helped slow a lot of parents down, because we weren't taking kids to multiple after-school activities on multiple days. So in a lot of sense, it did help, reconnect people and slow people down. It took it to probably more a quieter time. Back in the day, back to the 80s or 70s, whatever it might have been, right? Where before your time, a little bit before, in my early times, where it was hung out with your mates on a bike and rode around the street, right? There wasn't as much organised sport or pressure to do things. But so that was a benefit. But it seems like things have relatively gone back to normal and sports started back up and after school activities are back to where they were. So it's sort of great, but also a disadvantage as well in that sense, mate. Yeah,
true. Also with your practice offering addiction counselling as well. And I'm also I'm particularly interested in counselling for pornography addiction, because I think that is, I guess, maybe over stigmatized, but I just feel like it's misinformed what people think about it. In the sense that it's just like any other addiction to where, that's just from what I've seen. You can obviously disagree, but I guess just from
absolutely. No, it's an addiction. Absolutely.
It's it's just like, it's just anything that a habit that you're just trying to break. I've had my own, struggles with it. But I guess, what's your experience with dealing this with clients?
Mate, look, it is more prevalent at the moment, and rightly or wrongly, pornography is way more accessible than it ever has been in the history of humankind. And kids are getting access to it a lot younger. I've heard a lot of stories of kids in year 5, year 6 getting access to pornography on phones, right? You can Google stuff, you can, social media stuff that it's so more accessible now. And unfortunately, it's a lot more accessible. And I think, to be honest, it's a mix in terms of the reasons behind it. For some people, it's about exploration. For some people, it's about, fear and anxiety. For some people, it goes into some deeper rooted addiction issues. Like, it's different for different people, but you're right, it is stigmatized and it's not spoken about a lot. And it definitely is something that needs to be a little bit more understood. But we certainly appreciate now the long-term effects of, overstimulation through pornography, and that can certainly skew views on sexual intimacy, sexuality, what's acceptable, what's not, and it certainly has exposed a lot of people to, a lot more riskier behaviours in terms of sexual activity as a result of what they're watching or seeing on, on pornography or online or whatever it might be, mate.
Yeah, and it can give, I guess, a false image of what not normal, but I guess what sexual relationships are like. It can give like a more animated or even more rough view of what it is. Definitely. And so looking at it itself, it's a huge industry. I saw a statistic where it was like, it's even bigger than like YouTube and like Google, like in terms of how much money's in it.
Sure. I wouldn't be surprised, mate. Yeah.
It's like, how do you even address that? It's just, that's the hard thing to address, I guess.
Yeah. But to be honest, it's not even about the impact it has on people's sexual relationships. And you're right, it's not just males watching pornography. It's it's females. It's every gender watching it, and it's skewing a lot of people's view of what is acceptable and what's not. But it also can create a lot of anxiety and fear around forming relationships, and because some people compare themselves, right? I don't look like this, and I can't do that, and I don't have this, and I don't have that. So, how is someone going to be attracted to me, or what's going to make me appealing, or is that what I have to do to be appealing to someone? It can certainly skew not just what you're doing when you're engaging in intimate acts, but it also can be about not yours, but people's comfortability around whether they're even capable of doing what they're seeing on pornography. And then that certainly skews a lot of people. So it's not just about, people looking at that and then replicating. It can also be people becoming more anxious and fearful about their abilities to do what they're seeing or replicate what the image is in their mind of what should be happening or shouldn't be happening, mate. So there's a lot of relationship issues just in that regard, mate, or starting out in relationships. Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's something people don't think about. It's not, they just think about it in terms of how it plays out in terms of reality, but also can be really overwhelming and can really scare people in or out of relationships, or even just personal relationships, because they feel judged or worried that if they're not doing what's done on pornography, someone's going to think they're not that great or not that worthy or not that prowess, or however you want to describe it.
Yeah. Right. It's super interesting. I want to look into more in that, because I think it's something, again, it's over stigmatized, and through just people that I've talked to, it's just something that's so normal to view. And I mean, whether you have a negative relationship with it or not, like you could have a positive relationship, and that's okay. But I guess I know just personally, like it's like a moment of like satisfaction, and then followed by probably like a couple of days of just absolute like
regret, remorse,
you feel horrible.
Absolutely. And that's where the fine line is, Lockie, and for people who are going through, who are probably listening or watching this podcast and maybe struggling with their own issues around pornography, it is stigmatized and is demonized, and it does make it harder to talk about it openly and honestly. So I'm very grateful that you're being so open about it, and we're having a discussion in terms of it, mate, because it is something that we want to just normalized to a degree, and want to help people understand how to actually manage it moving forward in terms of their own relationships or their own sexuality or their own, intimate lives, because it does skew people, and what we think is normal and acceptable clearly shouldn't be judged on what we're seeing on pornography, because it's not how it is.
Yeah.
Not how it should be in reality anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And through your experience, and as you're learning more yourself, because I'm, I know you're a very avid learner. You're always looking to improve, obviously. I guess, is there any new, discoveries or updates, new approaches that you've found in the world of mental health, in the world of just psychology, that people don't necessarily know about, or that they aren't informed about?
Well, it's a bit like how I approach everything in terms of addictions, whether it's pornography, alcohol, gambling, whatever it might be, mate. We're looking at it more from a holistic view and more from an emotional standpoint, which is not what it used to be back in the day. It used to be just very, process driven and very addiction focused. Right? We do A, we do B, we do C. We do 12-step programs. We do AA, we do NA, and there's certainly places and options for that to happen. But try to be a little bit more emotionally aware rather than just, you have to do this or you have to do that. I take a more emotional approach to it, trying to understand, again, like we do with athletes, where's it coming from and what makes you feel more comfortable when when you're viewing these sort of things or you're doing these sort of things. Like, what are we trying to emotionally escape from? Because unfortunately, a lot of addiction issues are emotionally based, but it's not something that has been traditionally focused on or spoken about. It's been more process driven and more addiction management strategies as opposed to emotional understanding and awareness, Lockie. So that's how I like to approach any addiction issue, no matter what it is.
Yeah. It's like that, the classic thing that kids do is like they ask why after like everything you say. And I feel like in my experiences with seeing therapists, like that they do that a lot, and it's to get to the source of it. Like you said, like you want to actually have an emotional approach to it.
Exactly right. Yeah. Because there's an emotional reason people are sinking into addiction, whether it's gambling or alcohol or drugs or pornography, right? There's a significant emotional component to that. And back in the day, we never used to worry about the emotional component of it. If someone had an anxiety diagnosis as well as an addiction issue, they'd have to go and deal with them separately. So you wouldn't be able to deal with your addiction and your anxiety at the same time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. It was one or the other. And if someone had a dual diagnosis, they wouldn't be admitted into rehab centers or wouldn't be able to engage in those sort of things because it's a dual diagnosis and we can't manage it at the same time. That's what we used to think. So certainly in terms of psychology and mental health, we're being a lot more flexible in terms of, can be a significant anxiety issue to addiction. There can be a significant depression focus, and we can do dual diagnosis and we can treat both at the same time, which is much better for our clients and for people struggling because we can do both at the same time as opposed to, right, well, now you've got to focus on your anxiety and then you come back to us for the rehab stuff, or you've got to do your rehab stuff first and you can worry about your anxieties. It used to be very militant and very structured along those lines. And there's still certain places that do that. Yeah. But we're becoming more aware that there's usually a dual diagnosis. There's usually there's a comorbidity process to this, mate. It's not just about one or the other.
Yeah. It's all very like interrelated.
Yeah.
Like, I like how you're approaching it in a holistic sense. Just personally, I've found that's good. For me, it's improved my life. Looking at things in a holistic sense.
Yep.
And I guess there's so much that's coming out. There's so many like new age approaches. Like what else has there been that you've found, like I guess with breathing, and then there can be the nutritional side of things.
Yep.
There can be the sleep patterns as well. I'm sure you'd be working with people to help that. Like, is there any other? Yeah,
you definitely need to take a more holistic view, and that's definitely something that has improved over the course of the last 10, 15 years. Newer styles of evidence-based counselling around acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness-based techniques. There's a lot more research now around that emotional connection. Psychology has traditionally been about thoughts and CBT and very driven around, identifying thoughts and regulating thoughts. We start to understand that you take a step, below that, and there's a significant emotional component to how and why and where those, feelings start, and then that generates it into thoughts, mate. So personally, I'm a lot more focused on understanding feelings, and it's a little bit harder work. It's a little bit more, psychoanalytic or psychodynamic, which not a lot of psychologists are comfortable with, but certainly something that a lot of people are becoming more in tune with, in terms of getting that mix right between thoughts and feelings and impacts on people's habits or addictions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess in the world of grief, and you'd obviously be dealing with people who are grieving, and I guess it can come in many forms. And you were talking about how things used to be, I guess, process driven. It doesn't matter either way, but like, do you still approach people with that, who are grieving, with that, I guess, like maybe like it's like a 12-step approach I've heard, or like in a process driven approach, or do you mix it with a bit of, I guess, the opposite, like they're not really process to it?
I start with a lot more emotional insight.
Yeah.
And focus wholly and solely on the emotional component of it to start with. And then we start walking people through a grief process in terms of regulating thoughts and understanding behaviors, and being a little bit more focused on a process. But initially, it's understanding that emotion, normalizing it. It's coming to terms with loss and sadness and all those things. Locking and grief can be quite complex, because it's not just necessarily about one element of that grief. There can be multiple elements to that. It can be, relationships that wanted to be had but weren't had, or sadness around an awesome relationship that's no longer in existence. It's not just about death. That can be relationship breakdowns. That can be business breaking down. Grief's not just about loss of people. It can be anything and everything.
Yeah.
Which is where it becomes more complicated, because it's not, traditional anymore. There's grief happens for many different reasons, mate.
Yeah, I love how you speak to that, because like that's what I think should be again normalized more. In my experience, I've lost people, and that's been a grieving process, and with respect to them. But I've also missed out on opportunities, in my past life, in my past, relationships and certain things with like sport that haven't gone exactly my way, and even though I put my heart into it, it didn't go exactly my way, right? I just think it's great for people to realize, grieving is everything. It's not just you lost someone, like they passed away.
Yeah, exactly right.
Because then we can, I guess, use that process. Like
you're right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about death. That's obviously one form of grief, but as you identified, it could be a sporting career, it could be a business career, it could be a relationship, could be a uni degree, could be anything that you put your heart and soul into, as you said, Lockie, and it didn't go to plan or didn't work out, and that's devastating and absolutely fair enough. So you're right, mate. And other people might not consider that worthy of grief, but for us personally, if it's something that's significant and it's a loss, that's the definition of grief, mate, no matter what the situation involved or was about. Yeah,
that's super important to normalize for anyone watching or listening. Grief is something I think that would tie people down for many years without them knowing that they're grieving. Like even my cleaner, or our household cleaner, who I actually had on to speak as well.
Yeah.
She was like, I could tell you were grieving, but I could tell it wasn't like a person. It was more just like you were grieving a relationship. You were grieving like something that happened like with sport and stuff like that. And I was like, damn, like, how did you know? How did you know that? But I'm sure so many of us are grieving something, but then it's like, how do you address that in the first place? But like you said, you start with that. It's a more of an emotional thing. Is that where you're getting to the source of it first?
Absolutely.
Why? Yeah. That is, it's why is it hitting you so hard? Why is it?
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is it about that situation that's so personal and so overwhelming for you? And as I said, mate, it's not about judging and going, oh, well, that's nothing to worry about. What are you doing? It's all right. If that's where you're at and that's what you're feeling and thinking, then absolutely let's get to the bottom of it. Why? What is it about that emotion, or what is it about the situation, or what is it about it that's causing you to feel so overwhelmed? We understand that, then it's a bit easier to join some dots and put some strategies in place and move forward safely, mate. But if we don't get those insights or those understandings squared away, yeah, we can meditate, we can breathe, we can think this way or keep diaries or whatever it might be. But if we haven't understood the emotion, or we don't really get to the background or the insight that we need, that can last for a lot longer than is good for us or the people around us, mate.
And yeah, I love that. Well, I had something I was going to say, but I was like, no, that kind of fits exactly what I was thinking. Good. That's great. Like, do you often find with people, like, it's the source of why it's, bothering them is completely different to what they originally thought, or like often, as you dive in? Yeah,
often. Well, it's the name of your podcast, right? Path to Peace. It's different for everyone, right?
Yeah.
That's how you get to peace, right? It's a path, and it's rocky, and it's not the same for everyone, mate. But once you're on it and you get to that actual peace process, or you get to that peaceful understanding, mate, it makes everything a lot more straightforward, even when it's more complicated, mate. We just need to understand the source. You get to that. I think most people home and hose from there. They can manage it themselves pretty safely and relatively quickly. But if you don't get to that peace point, mate, it's horrendous, as you can absolutely appreciate.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. And that's, I guess your role. You don't want to be seeing them forever. You just want to carry them through that stage in their life where they most need it.
Correct. And you want to do that respectfully and compassionately. And I like to do it very diligently and very directly when it's required, Lockie. And that's how I find the quickest way, or the most straightforward way to that happily ever after, mate. Sometimes it's a rocky road and it's a difficult road, as we talked about, but you get to that insight, you get to that understanding, makes the rest of it a lot more straightforward. That's for sure. Yeah.
I love that. And I guess last thing I want to just touch on, I guess through your years of experience, professionally and I guess personally, what is something that you can tell anyone listening now, who's, I guess, struggling with an area of their mental health? Obviously, it's a very broad area to touch on. But yeah, through your experience, what is there something you can tell people?
Mate, if I was to distill it down to its absolute essence in terms of my personal and professional opinion, I always say to people, it's okay to not be okay. I really want to encourage anyone out there that might be struggling with their own mental health, their own well-being, physically, whatever it might be. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
If you can't even be okay when you're not okay, then there's no chance of reaching out for help. There's no discussion. There's no path to peace. There's nothing.
Yeah.
Lucky. So if I was going to distill it down and make it very clear to people, which is what I like to try and do, just let yourself know it's okay to not be okay. It doesn't matter if people agree or don't agree, or you feel like they're listening or they're not listening. You've got to know within yourself that if you're struggling, that's absolutely fair and reasonable. Because if you demonize yourself, there's no way of moving forward, mate. So that's what I would say to people. Just, it's okay when it's not okay. Just easy.
It's great. And that's thrown around a lot, but people actually, you got to break it down a bit. Like it's, that's okay to not be okay. But like there is obviously the shame part of it. And it's also like, people don't want to deal with the baggage, but like that's going to be there forever.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And I say to people, if you try and bullshit your way out of it, you're going to struggle. It's going to make it worse. But you can't sit in it forever either. So it's fine lines.
Yeah.
Much versus not enough. But if we can't even get to our own internal recognition that we're struggling, and that's okay, then there's, as you, mate, your podcast title describes it all right. There's no path to peace if you're not even going to be willing to accept that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to feel weak, particularly for us blokes.
Yeah.
We hate it.
Yeah, exactly. It's supposed to be. Historically, it's been against our DNA, but
correct.
That's not the case anymore. We're moving forward.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This is a great chat. I've got my own insights for myself because I want to dive into this world. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
No problems, Lockie. Thanks for having me, mate. I've enjoyed the chat, and hopefully some people get some good content out of what we discussed today. But I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for being so open and honest, mate. It's made me feel a lot more comfortable chatting, and hopefully that's come across to everyone that's listening. Yeah, hopefully that's what I hope for people to see as well. So that's good. Thank you so much for coming, and and anyone watching, listening, stay tuned. Obviously, Joel operates his own Endeavour wellness practice, so feel free to reach out if anything that you see in this interview is something that you would like to extend upon.
Yeah, there's always help out there. So
absolutely, go seek it, mate. That'd be my advice as well. It doesn't have to necessarily be me, but anybody, right? Like, just exactly that. If you're struggling, it's not weak to speak. Get out there and speak.
Anyway, go seek that help. Yeah. Lovely. All right. Thank you so much. I'll see you all next time.
Thanks, Loggy.